Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Before I get started with my talk, I'd like first to convey my sincere thanks and appreciation for our brothers and sisters in the United Arab Emirates for the great hospitality, of course. It's not unusual of them. And I'd like also to extend my thanks to the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance for this opportunity to be here speaking to all of you. My talk is centered around what we call the 2024 to 2027 spectrum outlook of CST. CST is basically the regulator or the spectrum regulator of Saudi Arabia. My talk is structured into 4 segments. The first one is basically answering the questions of what is the spectrum outlook and why we have it. The second segment will go a little bit over the existing or the latest outlook, giving you a little bit of overview of its topics. Then I'll go in the third segment into a little bit of details about some of the interesting bands and directions in that outlook. And finally, I'll conclude this talk with a brief overview of what we've got cooking these days for what happens next following this outlook. Starting with the what and why, spectrum outlook for us is a window into the mind of CST, figuratively speaking, of course. It gives a little bit of, like a view into the spectrum policy of CST. The inaugural first document was released in 2021. It was covering the period or the outlook period from 2021 to 2023. And recently, probably around the end of last year, beginning of this year, we released the second version of that outlook. It covers the years 2024 to 2027. The objective of the outlook is to give transparency and predictability to the radio spectrum users from different verticals and industries. Predictability and transparency in regards of what kind of spectrum pipelines we have ready for the outlook cycle, for the new outlook cycle, and what governing regulatory frameworks are going to be studied or released or maybe discussed throughout the outlook cycle. Now, into the recently released spectrum cycle, I'd like to just take you into a quick journey into how we developed that outlook. Basically, we started by looking at local context, the strategy of the regulator, CST, the strategy of different governmental and public entities within the country. Also, we were considering the global context, mainly or heavily influenced by ITU agenda items, especially for WRC 2027. Also, what's happened actually in 2023. And if you notice, the cycles of the outlook are kind of synced with the WRC conferences. Taking into account all that, we developed a very, maybe an initial list of priority areas. We don't go directly and look at spectrum bands. We start first by identifying priority areas. This list then is matched with some enabling spectrum bands, and then we engage the public. We start by talking to different partners, whether in the telecommunication industry, aviation, different types of industry, even in academia. We release the initial draft of the outlook, highlighting spectrum bands and priority areas. Then we get feedback. We got feedback from a variety of contributors. Actually, we've maybe not listed here, but we got also feedback from individual contributors from the kingdom or outside the kingdom. And using that rich feedback, we were able to really polish that outlook and reduce, or let's say put out a very specific priority areas. We reached to the point that we have 9 priority areas in our outlook, starting from IMT, the needs of IMT, going all the way to the needs of research and development. Now, I know this is a lot of priority areas to discuss within this limited session, but I would like to focus on or give you a closer look onto some of those areas and what's been done in those areas. Basically, I'd like to focus on these 3 because they are more relevant to the theme of Dynamic Spectrum Alliance Summit. I think they are more enabled with dynamic spectrum access, light licensing, things that are kind of within the lines of DSA and the summit. So when we look at these three areas, we match them with four different spectrum bands that could be enabling for these areas. So basically, what you see in the first row is the matching between the band and the priority area. What I want to turn your attention to is basically the second row. It shows what has been done in the previous cycle, and it continues to this cycle. Basically, for the lower 4 gigahertz, from 4 to 4.2, in the previous cycle, we managed to put together a light licensing framework. So the spectrum itself was not released, but the light licensing framework that should govern the release of any spectrum that is lightly licensed was set in the previous cycle, and we are now preparing in this cycle to release the first chunk of spectrum that is governed by that light licensing. Then also when we go to 6 gigahertz, we were one of the few countries that made the bold decision to open the whole band, the whole 12 megahertz for indoor wireless local area networks, or basically Wi-Fi. And we've been noticing a lot of interesting development in that area. Also, another band of interest for us is the 26 gigahertz band. And a lot of regulators around the world are contemplating how that band is going to be released. We're not different than a lot of those regulators. For 26 gigahertz or the millimeter wave, we are really reconsidering the licensed national-wide approach, and we're trying to think much like maybe our colleagues in Ofcom about a localized or maybe light licensing approach, mainly to enable the deployment of fixed wireless access, plugging capacity gaps for mobile networks, enabling verticals who could utilize that band. And when we go to finally the 60 gigahertz, this band has been open for in the previous cycle for indoor Wi-Fi. And when we look at the new cycle, what we see is that we are, continuing with what has been done. Basically, for the lower 4 gigahertz, we are planning right now. I think we're in the final stages of putting out the regulations that allows access to the lower 4 gigahertz band. 6 gigahertz, we are also in the final stages of actually putting out the regulations for the automated frequency coordination system that will allow Wi-Fi to go outdoor and also guarantee or give a peace of mind for fixed service providers. For the 26 gigahertz, as I mentioned, it's a process of really cleaning the band that was in the previous cycle, but now it's the process of developing our own understanding of how we're going to release the band. For 60 gigahertz, it's a decision that's been made a long time ago, but it's going to be released in this cycle, which is enabling 60 gigahertz to be used outdoors to enable fixed wireless access, mainly through innovative technologies like Telegraph and any other technologies that really delivers fiber-like connectivity to different regions in the country. Now, with that in mind, I'd like just to take you into another short journey into what we are going to do next, because the outlook is not the end of things for us. Once an outlook is released, we start working on what's going to happen next, how we come to further our agenda. Basically, we are mainly influenced by what's happening in the ITU, especially the agenda items around IMT and direct-to-device. And we are also monitoring, global development, especially in bands that has been maybe allocated in our country, but there is a lot of great debate about it. Of course, nowadays we're really looking at the 15 gigahertz and the 7 gigahertz, two bands that are in the agenda item of WRC 27, and we are taking a very probably locally, this is not a usual approach to look at these two spectrum bands, because usually when you talk about IMT spectrum standardization, we look at IMT as one big network. We don't really look at the needs of verticals and the need of public networks. But to this new cycle of WRC, we're starting to develop this understanding that probably it's good from a spectrum policy perspective to look at these bands differently. 15 gigahertz is probably good for local kind of deployment. And that's why, as a policymaker, we start to study that band mainly for private and local use, while 7 gigahertz is a great opportunity for us to be a launch pad for 6G, especially that we already have the fate of 6 gigahertz, known, and it's being actually used effectively indoors, and we're hoping for extending that use to the outdoors. Again, when we go to 6 gigahertz, yes, we have a clear path to the future, what's going to happen. However, it doesn't mean that we are not looking into the current developments that are ongoing in other countries. 6 gigahertz, yes, we're going to have an AFC system there in place. We're going to have the regulations to enable an AFC deployment, especially outdoors, but that doesn't mean that it's only tailored for Wi-Fi or and fixed services or fixed wireless access. We're monitoring global development, especially things around how to enable the sharing between maybe mobile and Wi-Fi, mobile fixed links, all those kind of things that could fall under the umbrella of automated frequency coordination. With that, I think I've reached the end of my talk. I really hope that I did a good job in outlining the plans of CST and kind of got you intrigued a little bit to talk to us about what you have cooking. And again, it's a statement that we usually say everywhere when we go as CST employees. A good spectrum policy is a transparent one, like the radio spectrum. So thank you.